the Philippines was under a dictatorship for 24 years. The name of the leader was Ferdinand Marcos. He has passed, and I don't think it takes rocket science for you to sort of conclude that there's something amiss when somebody remains the leader for 24 years. There's something wrong there. So he declared martial law in 1972, I think, and there's a lot of human rights violations were committed, and it's an open book. Like, there were a lot of journalists who were fighting the dictatorship and the martial law. They were all kidnapped, and well, they were taken from their homes, and then they were charged of different crimes like inciting rebellion, stuff like that. And many of them have already told their story about being tortured and stuff. The Marcoses remained that they didn't know about the tortures, that the people who tortured them did it without informing the government or the president, and had they known, they wouldn't have allowed that to happen. And so that's how they remain their innocence. Aside from that, they've sequestered a lot of private companies. My father was actually a victim of martial law. The company that he was working for at that time, a broadcasting station, was sequestered by the government. They were all fired, and he remained jobless for a really long time. But outside of that, to this day, there's still a lot of victims of martial law who come out and tell their story. A lot of the journalists who remain to this day, they were also victims of martial law. Not the leader, but the most popular person who was going against and was fighting the regime was named Ninoy Aquino. He was eventually exiled. He was a senator, and he was actually he and Marcos belonged to the same fraternity in college. And eventually he was exiled to the US. And then eventually he decided to come back. He was assassinated. He knew he was going to be assassinated, but he decided to come back. It, however, started an aggressive fight against the government. And so he was assassinated in 1983. In 1986, the first, and as far as I know, only revolution happened that ousted the Marcoses and exiled them with the help of the US government to Guam. The Marcoses are now back in the Philippines. Many of them are back in Philippine politics. And several weeks ago, one of the most popular actresses in the Philippines, Tony Gonzaga, who has her own YouTube channel, interviewed Bongbong Marcos, who is the only son of Ferdinand Marcos, and it created a lot of controversy. A lot of people felt that she shouldn't have done that because of what the father has done. To this day, he remains a huge supporter of his father and remains the innocence of his father. And so people felt that you shouldn't have done that because they've done a lot of bad things to this country. Our economy sunk. Aside from the human rights violation, our economy sunk under their dictatorship. And however, I decided to watch, and so many are criticizing Tony Gonzaga for it. Others are saying it's her channel, it's a free country, she has the right to do whatever she does. So I decided to watch the interview, and just she started with very light questions. She asked about his memories growing up in Malacanang, which is the equivalent of the White House in the Philippines. And it's a known trick, that's a known strategy among journalists. When you start an interview in an effort to make the person feel comfortable, you talk about something positive and light, and then eventually get into the meat of the interview. But it did not progress. The interview did not progress. It's it was just a bad interview, not because she decided to interview the son of a dictator, but just because it's a bad interview. There was no depth, no narrative, nothing new. There was no flow. I didn't discover anything new about Bongbong Marcos. She asked a lot of questions that have already been asked before. She wouldn't follow it up to get more out of the question. She wouldn't, and there was just no question that was new, no insightful information, or no attempt to get something insightful from everything. So I would actually go, if I'm going to be blunt, it's just a boring interview. And I mean, like, if somebody interviews Fidel Castro or Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un, I would watch that. They're all dictators. I would watch that because I would like to get something, right? I would like to know about their psyche, their principles, where they get all of these ideologies. I didn't get anything out of Bongbong Marcos, and I refuse to believe that he's not an intelligent person. He managed to pass his college. He studied in the US, I think, or in Europe, and he has his college degree and postgraduate degrees. There's something in that gray matter, but there was no exposition, nothing new. And it's true that, you know, as a journalist, it's your job to be as objective as possible. You present all sides, and so it wasn't really something shocking that she would decide to interview Bongbong Marcos. But her interview is a testament. Just anybody cannot be a journalist. You can't just run your own YouTube channel and call yourself a journalist, or an interviewer, or a host for that matter. She showed just how much of a non-journalist she was because of the lack of depth of that interview. It takes more than just laying out some questions and putting an interesting character in front of the camera, because we have to admit Bongbong Marcos is an interesting person. He's the son of a dictator who managed to trick an entire country and get him in power for 24 years. He has that DNA in him. He would have some insights about his father, and a skilled, good journalist or interviewer for that matter would get something substantial out of that interview, because she sat down with Bongbong Marcos for a considerable amount of time, but didn't get anything new. So it's not just about getting an interesting person in front of a camera. You need to structure the interview properly, conduct proper research, think about what it is that you really want, and lay it out for people to see. But there was so little preparation, and you can see that there was so little preparation in that interview that it was just a wasted time. Even if her objective was to paint Bongbong Marcos in a positive light and the family, she failed because it was just boring. I didn't get anything out of it. So it was a testament on how you actually need professional journalists to do interviews like this. You also need to, even if she seems to be pro Marcos, and that's her political disposition, there's nothing much we can do about it. But you need some intelligence to make sense out of it, right? You need to study what has happened. Even if you favor them, you still need to study what has happened for you to ask substantial questions, and that was not there. In general, we're a forgiving nation, and so I wasn't really surprised. Really, I wasn't surprised that something like that happened. Whether or not it should have is a different story, which just reminds me on how many netizens of Korea would actually talk about the difficulties and the conflicts that Korea has against Japan or China and stuff like that. And many other people are, they would comment how that's a thing of the past. Why do you keep on bringing it up and stuff? But this incident made me realize maybe there is some value in reminding people about things like that, because it will also allow us to prevent it from happening again. So maybe it's not so wrong for the Koreans to keep on talking about their conflicts with Japan and China, because it allows them to prevent it from happening again. There's also another thing about that interview. He kept on calling Bongbong Marcos Sir Bong. So that's just a proof on how he puts Bongbong in such a high status, higher than where she thinks herself is. Because if you think you're equal, you would just call the person either by their last name, Mr. Marcos, or Bongbong. But she kept on calling him Sir Bong, which was a little off-putting for me. But even more off-putting is the fact that Bongbong did not ask her to stop calling him Sir Bong in the interview. And maybe he has done so in the past and she kept on calling him that. But still, in an interview, I think it's important for him to have communicated it to the audience that he doesn't want that title. He doesn't want to be addressed that way, and he shouldn't want that, right? The next is that he did something. Bongbong actually said something really nice when he said that he wants to get rid of colonization. If there's anything in the history of the Philippines that he would get rid of, it would be colonization. I think that was something beautiful. I also agree. If there's anything that I would get rid of in the past, it would be colonization, because that was sort of instilled the mentality of inferiority in us. So I wish that also never happened. In closing, there's so many layers into it. The first layer is that I would have felt very strongly about it had it been a good interview, but it was just a bad interview. I don't think it even matters. I mean, if this is the kind of interview that bad people will have, they'll probably go, let them have it. It'll probably be good because people just won't listen, or would just feel like this person is such a boring person. No shade to Tony. I don't think she even claims to be a journalist, which is good. But I'm just saying, I think it would have been different had it been a good interview, and had she been successful in painting the Marcoses in a good light, I would have probably reacted very, very strongly as well. Number two is that she was well within her right to do whatever she wanted to do. It's her channel. She can interview whoever she wanted to. Now, sure, we don't want people to forget about what happened, but then we can't ask her to do that. We can't force her to share our views, because obviously she feels differently. The same way in this country, there are Republicans, there are Democrats, there are apolitical ones. The same way in the Philippines, there are people who still support the Marcoses, there are people who don't support the Marcoses, but those who support them, what can we do? That's who they support. We can only ask ourselves to do what is necessary so that other people will forget, so that we don't forget what happened to our country. So I guess that it's a reminder on how important it is to keep that anger alive and to keep the memory alive. And it's also important for us to support the right people in YouTube, in Twitter and in Facebook and in all social media, and to read their articles in newspapers and watch them on television. Because if we just let whoever to do whatever they want to do, it's not a good thing, because there is no balance, there is no intelligence behind important stuff. They would just continue glamorizing things that should not be glamorized, and that's not going to be good for our country. And so that's my take. We can't fault Tony Gonzaga for believing what she believes, but we can ask ourselves to make sure to not let it happen again. So we need to be more vigilant than the other side. I think that's what we can do. Let's support those that deserve to be supported. Let's listen to them more, support them more, do what we can, because we can't expect others to do it for us. That's it.